Welcome to our What If series, part of Glitchtory. Today we're taking a plunge into something truly fascinating, an extraordinary scenario. We're exploring a world that almost was, a version of history where September 11th, 2001 unfolded not as tragedy, but as just another Tuesday. Picture it. Dawn is breaking over the East Coast. That early light glints off the glass towers in Manhattan, making them gleam gold. It's the kind of morning New Yorkers know well, cool, calm, and full of routine. Down below, the subways rattle with energy. They're packed with commuters in suits, holding briefcases, juggling bagels, and coffee that smells slightly over-roasted. No one's looking up. Everyone's focused on the commute, eyes down, minds already at their desks. Far above, silver planes quietly carve lines into a flawless blue sky. Inside the World Trade Center, elevators hum as they rise. Desks are filling. Phones are starting to ring. The city's normal rhythm as it stirs awake. Somewhere, a janitor is wiping down the marble floors, scrubbing away last night's footprints. Maybe up on the fifth seafloor, someone's microwaving stale pizza for breakfast. Someone else scrolls through their BlackBerry, checking the markets. It's just another Tuesday, nothing special. A city unshaken. Over at the Pentagon, the pattern repeats. Morning briefings are underway. Generals glance at their watches, half listening to updates. One grumbles about traffic on I-395. Who hasn't? Another jots down a few lines on Middle East intelligence. But in this timeline, those notes stay just that, notes. They don't become fuel for a global fire. The building never gets hit, and that makes all the difference. Meanwhile, on TV, anchors are gossiping about Michael Jordan. Is he making another comeback? Wall Street is trying to find its footing again after the tech bust. The dot-com hangover is still lingering. What you don't see, what never appears, are the live feeds of smoke pouring from towers. You don't hear cell phones capturing whispered goodbyes from stairwells. No fire chiefs calling in Mayday messages. None of that happens here. Because in this version of events, 4 jets take off without incident. Passengers buckle up, maybe close their eyes, expecting to land in Los Angeles or some other routine destination. No cockpit doors are forced open. No codes are whispered in distress. Nothing goes wrong. And when the planes land, the gate agents are cracking jokes about delays or misplaced luggage, not mourning lives lost. There are no names to etch into memorials, no monuments carved out of grief. Here, those names never need carving. This is what I call glitchery, a glitch in history, a moment where catastrophe misses its cue and never finds its stage. In this world, 4 planes stay just planes, and Tuesday stays Tuesday. It's the day the century never really turned. And that's exactly what we're here to explore today. Glitchory, as a concept, is a speculative tool, a thought experiment that lets us dive into how profoundly different the world would look if a single massive event, like the 9/11 attacks, had been foiled. Our mission is to trace the ripple effects. What would change in American domestic life, in foreign policy, civil liberties, global conflicts, even in how we remember, how we tell our shared story? Because in this world, those attacks never happened. This isn't about rehashing what did happen. It's about examining what didn't and how that absence shapes a completely different reality. It's a fascinating exercise, one that forces us to recognize just how many parts of our modern world trace back to that single terrible day. We'll be digging into how the foiling of 9/11 reshapes everything, from the laws passed here at home to the political landscape of the Middle East, even to the pace at which certain technologies evolve. But before we explore those ripple effects, let's pause and ask the obvious question: how does this happen? How does something that massive, that meticulously planned, just not happen? What creates the glitch? Here's the compelling part. It doesn't begin with some dramatic blockbuster intervention. It doesn't start with a car chase, a last-minute missile strike, or a Bond-style agent uncovering the plan at the 11th hour. No, in this version of history, it starts small, really small. And honestly, it's kind of mundane. We're talking about little things, quiet observations, slightly different choices, minor adjustments that, when they line up just right, create a cascade effect, a series of tiny ripples that build into a wave. Let's take one example. Picture a flight instructor in Florida. In our world, some instructors raised concerns. Students who were eager to learn how to steer big jets, but weren't interested in takeoffs or landings. That odd behavior raised red flags, but somehow those warnings never gained real traction. They didn't reach critical mass. In this alternate timeline, though, that same instructor, Rudy Deckers, who trained one of the actual 9/11 hijackers, files his report. But this time, it lands on the right desk. Maybe it's a desk belonging to a new analyst, someone sharp, or a supervisor with a different instinct, someone actively looking for patterns, who isn't numb to background noise. This time, the concern doesn't vanish into the bureaucratic void. It sticks. It matters. And it isn't just Florida. Let's move to Newark Airport. A customs agent spots something off. A traveler's passport doesn't quite line up. Maybe the stamps look too fresh. Maybe the travel itinerary is strange. It's nothing major, just a gut feeling. Could be instinct, could be simple procedure. But this time, instead of waving the person through with a glance, the agent slows things down. A few more questions, an extra check on the contact address, a missing digit in the phone number, a travel detail that doesn't quite fit. It's not dramatic, it's just thorough. But that tiny delay, that extra minute, it's enough to shake a plan, make someone miss a connection, raise a small flag somewhere down the line. It disrupts timing. So now we have Florida and Newark, but there's more. In Phoenix, there was an FBI agent named Colleen Rowley. In our reality, she filed what became known as the Phoenix Memo, raising alarms about suspicious students at flight schools. But her warning didn't make waves. It barely caused a ripple. In this glitchery timeline, her voice finds an audience. Maybe the internal structure shifts just slightly, new leadership, a more attentive supervisor, a better system for prioritizing leads. She writes her summary, hits send, and this time it doesn't disappear. Someone reads it, and what's more, they connect it to the report from Florida, maybe even to that traveler in Newark. Now, a pattern emerges. Suddenly, conversations begin. A task force is mentioned, perhaps informally at first. Memos are forwarded. Interagency phone calls are made. Analysts start pulling late nights. What's key here is timing. All of this happens days before the attack window, not weeks too late. And that makes all the difference. The plotters don't get the chance to slip into the shadows. There's no last-minute retreat, no pivot. The timing is off. Their window narrows. Their movements are watched. The net begins to tighten. And it's all thanks to these small shifts, vigilance, communication, and maybe just a little bit of luck, that derail everything. It almost sounds anticlimactic, doesn't it? But that's exactly the point. This isn't some Hollywood-style thriller where a last-minute hero tackles a villain on the runway. This is quiet intelligence work, sober, methodical, and precise, clicking into place just in time. And what's really remarkable is how global the whole thing becomes, even though it starts with such small local details. You see, intelligence sharing was already happening back then, so maybe a tip from the U.S., something about foreign nationals at flight schools, makes its way across the Atlantic. In Hamburg, German police move in. They raid a dingy apartment, no big headlines, no flashing lights, just a quiet, targeted action. And maybe they get lucky. Someone was sloppy. A burner phone left behind, half hidden under a mattress. When they crack it open, call logs lead back, right back to a motel in New Jersey. Dots start connecting across continents. Now you've got U.S. analysts pulling all-nighters, cross-checking phone numbers with hotel reservations, rental car receipts, even flight manifests, especially the ones flagged by that customs agent in Newark. A sense of urgency builds that simply wasn't there before. And then it happens. It's 4 a.m., just outside Boston. There's a knock at a motel door. Inside, two men freeze. Their bags are half packed on the beds. They never make it to Logan Airport. Game over. Just like that. And similar scenes play out in other cities. Quiet arrests in New York, maybe in Dallas, no shootouts, no panic. The whole network unravels thread by thread before a single plane leaves its assigned flight path, so the plot is foiled. But how does the public react? Does America freak out? Surprisingly, no. That's what makes this so fascinating. It's all incredibly muted compared to what we lived through. Sure, morning commuters might catch a glimpse of handcuffed suspects on the local news, a 2-minute story between traffic and weather. Cable news pundits spend a day or two arguing about border security or Saudi visa policies. They speculate about whether this was a lucky break or a sign of improved intelligence. Was it foresight or coincidence? The usual debates. But there's no emotional core, no smoke in the sky, no images of people jumping, no funerals carried live on television. There are no black wreaths on suburban doors. There's no shared national wound. Instead, it's just relief. A brief, breathless moment of realization. We dodged something huge. Journalists chased the story for a few days, asking how close we really came. Maybe a Senate committee holds a few hearings, makes some stern faces, promises tighter borders and better coordination. But that's where it ends. There's no national trauma, no mass grieving. Civil liberties groups raise concerns about the scope of surveillance and arrests, but their voices are largely drowned out by the collective exhale. A few loud radio hosts claim it proves we need to stay vigilant, but most people don't feel shaken. Instead, the mood is more like, well, that was close, but we're fine. It couldn't really happen here. The system worked. And because the horror never fully lands, life just snaps back. Quickly. For most Americans, normalcy returns almost immediately. Sure, airports tighten up slightly, maybe a few more guards. Some added random checks at the X-ray machine, a little more scrutiny of carry-ons. But nothing dramatic. Nothing like what we actually lived through. Families still walk right up to the gate to say goodbye. They linger over those last hugs. That doesn't change. The ritual of travel remains familiar, even intimate. Business travelers might grumble about their bags getting searched. It's an inconvenience, but one they forget by the time they land. Air travel doesn't transform into a stage for ritualized anxiety. There's no security theater, no universally understood ballet of shoes off, laptops out, and arms raised in a scanner. And the news cycle? It moves on. Fast. CNN doesn't loop footage of burning towers. Instead, it turns back to the usual: celebrity gossip, NASDAQ drama, Michael Jordan's rumored return. The foiled plot becomes a headline. A significant one, sure, but not a defining one. It fades quietly into background noise. It doesn't redefine everything. And that includes the presidency. George W. Bush is still in that Florida classroom. Bright alphabet posters on the walls, children reading from a picture book. He's perched on one of those tiny chairs, politely listening, waiting for the photo op to wrap up. No aide whispers in his ear, no shift in his face, no rapid pivot to wartime leadership. At most, an aide checks his watch and reminds him about the next stop on the itinerary. Local reporters jot down boilerplate quotes. President visits school, praises teachers. That's the story. The whole thing passes without interruption. And on TV? The anchors are still talking about Michael Jordan. Will he make another comeback? The financial segments are back to tech stocks, still unpacking the long tail of the dot-com crash. There's no hint that the world just came dangerously close to a historic rupture. They're completely oblivious to the catastrophe that never came. It's just another day in the news cycle. In living rooms across the country, TVs hum softly in the background. Kids are packing lunches, dogs bark at the mailman, planes fly overhead, just a normal part of the background noise. They're not symbols of fear or looming catastrophe. They're just planes. No frantic calls from flight attendants, no passengers whispering goodbyes into phones, just business as usual at 30,000 feet, drinks being poured, tray tables clicking shut, flight attendants collecting napkins. Quiet, routine. Even those arrests in Boston and Newark barely register. Local news shows grainy footage, men in cuffs, faces obscured. The evening anchor reads it out calmly. FBI foils terror plot. Details remain classified. Then, without drama, the anchor pivots to a lighter story, maybe a cat rescued from a tree. And that's it. Families watching the news might shake their heads, murmur, "Glad they caught them," and then switch the channel to a sitcom. There's no moment of national pause. Nobody bookmarks September 11th with rage or grief. No candlelight vigils, no flowers stacked outside firehouses, no haunting visuals looped on cable news. The day just ends. By sunset, kids are playing tag under the streetlights. A mother hums along to the radio while doing the dishes, half listening to her husband mention that almost attacked thing he heard about on the news. Couldn't happen here, he mutters. She nods absently, already thinking about tomorrow's grocery list. The day folds itself away quietly, becoming just another square on the calendar. September 11th, 2001. A date with no echo, no long shadow cast across decades. And somewhere, far away, perhaps in a desert cave, a man with a satellite phone stares at the sand, furious that his grand plan unraveled. His anger remains hidden. The world never really learns to fear his name, not in airports, not in border crossings. He fades into obscurity. And for everyone else, for millions who will never know how close they came to fire and ash, the night comes gently, a final glass of water, a click of the bedside lamp, one more ordinary Tuesday, perfectly forgettable. That quiet ending sets the stage for a completely different America, profoundly different. Because without those images burned into the national psyche, the smoke over Manhattan, the gaping hole in the Pentagon, the machinery of American power never lurches into that panicked, war-footing mode. There's no call to arms, no unifying horror. The entire trajectory of the Bush presidency changes. He doesn't become a wartime president. He's spared the burden, but also denied the political armor that comes with leading a wounded nation. So instead, he drifts through his term as more of a manager-in-chief. He tackles the usual concerns, a sluggish economy, tax cuts, a debate over prescription drug coverage. His poll numbers hover in the low 50s, tied to familiar domestic grumbles. There's no rally around the flag moment. No iconic speech from a pile of rubble. No national consensus forged in fire. Without that image, without the burning towers, there's no emotional gravity pulling the country toward foreign conflict. No rallying cry to remake the world by force. And those foreign policy hawks, they're still there, still making noise, still calling for action on unfinished business in Afghanistan, still muttering about hidden threats, but without a catalyzing event. They can't sell a major war to a public more worried about mortgages and gas prices. Does counterterrorism funding still grow? Sure, but it grows in back rooms. It doubles, maybe. Intelligence agencies get more money, but incrementally, slowly, subject to budget fights, not driven by an emergency. There are whispers of reform, not declarations of war, and the implications for civil liberties? Massive. Take the Patriot Act. In our world, it exploded into law, overhauling surveillance powers, enabling bulk data collection, loosening wiretap restrictions, hugely controversial and hugely consequential. But here, it stays a draft. Maybe it circulates among a few committees, but it never gets the momentum it needs. Without a galvanizing crisis, there's no excuse to push it through. So, wiretaps still require traditional warrants. Library checkout records remain private. It seems like a minor thing. Who cares what books people read? But it reflects a much bigger truth. The balance between liberty and security remains tipped toward liberty. Even legal careers look different. That ambitious young ACLU lawyer who, in our world, built a career challenging Patriot Act provisions, they have fewer cases to fight, less constitutional friction. Privacy, for a while longer, feels like something Americans still have by default, not something they have to fight for in court. Let's talk airports. In this world, airports never transform into quasi-military checkpoints. The experience is fundamentally different. You still walk through with your water bottle. No one barks at you to remove your shoes. Grandparents don't shuffle barefoot through security lines, arms out like criminals. There are no color-coded threat levels, no blinking red alert banners on the news, no duct-tape jokes from late-night comedians, no Homeland Security urging Americans to prepare go bags in their basements, no TSA horror stories, no viral videos of pat-downs, fewer full-body scanners, no debate over how much strangers get to see under your clothes. Because the TSA, the massive agency we know today, was born from September 11th. In this world, it probably never forms. Airport security still exists, but it's different, less centralized, handled by existing agencies or private contractors. There's still vigilance, but it's calmer, less performative. Airline crews might watch for odd behavior, but without the constant low-grade tension of a post-terrorism society. And those gate reunions, they still happen. Families still meet travelers at the gate, grandparents with flowers, kids with hand-drawn signs. That intimate airport moment we lost after September 11th, it survives. This lighter security posture ripples out beyond airports. Think about Homeland Security, the department. In our world, DHS was a behemoth. 22 federal agencies merged into one giant, expensive apparatus with a single mission: prevent the next 9/11. But without a 9/11, that massive merger never happens. The agencies stay where they are. Customs, FEMA, the Coast Guard, the FBI, their roles remain compartmentalized. Power stays decentralized. There's no blank check restructuring of domestic security. The country's approach stays more cautious, less reactive. And what about local police? That's another major fork in the road. In this world, local police departments don't inherit surplus military equipment originally destined for Baghdad or Fallujah. The 1033rd program, the pipeline that gave cops armored trucks and tactical gear, remains small, if it exists at all. SWAT teams stay what they were meant to be: rare, elite units for hostage situations and high-risk raids. Not a regular fixture at protests, not the default setting for serving a warrant. Even career paths shift. Think about the generation that came of age around 2001. In our world, many of them enlisted because of 9/11. They joined to serve, to fight, to hunt shadows in foreign deserts. A whole generation shaped by war. But in this timeline, those same people make different choices. They go to college, start families, launch businesses. Some still join the military, of course, but their missions are different. Traditional deterrence roles, Korea, Europe, naval patrols, they're not embedded in counterinsurgency campaigns or learning how to navigate bomb-strewn roads. The military's focus remains conventional. And the national conversation? It stays centered on domestic issues: economic policy, healthcare, infrastructure. Political careers rise and fall on familiar debates: tax brackets, school funding, trade deals. Not existential threats from abroad. There are no debates haunted by grainy footage from black sites, no leaked photos of hooded prisoners, no Supreme Court showdowns over torture memos or detainee rights, because that entire apparatus never gets built. Of course, culture wars still rage. Oh, absolutely, the culture wars still rage, but the fires they burn around are different. The dividing lines remain: abortion rights, gun control, identity politics, the familiar battlegrounds of American life. What's missing is that heavy overlay of national security anxiety, that us versus them mentality never really sets in because the war on terror never truly begins. And yet, the security agencies, the CIA, the NSA, they still exist. They don't disappear. The machinery of American intelligence continues humming in the background. But critically, without the political license granted by a devastating attack on home soil, they operate with sharper boundaries, tighter leashes, more accountability. Surveillance still grows, yes. Technology never stops advancing. But without the war on terror, that growth is quieter, less invasive. Intelligence efforts stay focused on traditional targets: financial crimes, espionage, foreign state actors, not massive, controversial, domestic dragnet programs designed to monitor entire populations. So if you zoom out and look at the domestic landscape, what you see is familiar but fundamentally different. The Republic still stumbles forward on its old fractures: red versus blue, Wall Street versus Main Street, the eternal tension between liberty and control. Those forces haven't vanished. But without the galvanizing trauma of burning towers, the war on terror remains a blueprint that's never executed. A massive chapter in American life simply never gets written, and that absence changes everything about how the nation sees itself. Now let's shift the lens globally, because if the U.S. never launches the war on terror, the world map doesn't just look different, it evolves on an entirely different trajectory. Take Afghanistan. There's no invasion in October 2001. American boots never fill the valleys of Kandahar. No endless convoys of troops navigating mountain passes. No nation-building experiment stretched over 2 decades. Billions of dollars are never spent. Countless lives are never lost. There's no surge, no rotating deployments, no Western-style democracy project imposed at gunpoint. It just doesn't happen. So, what happens to the Taliban? They likely stay in power, or at least in control of major parts of the country. They continue their harsh rule, oppressing women, enforcing brutal codes, silencing dissent. Human rights groups still condemn them, diplomats still scold them. But without an American invasion, they don't become a global enemy. They remain what they are, a suffocating regional regime. And bin Laden, well, he doesn't get away with his plan. It's foiled. But his legacy is very different. He likely retreats into the tribal areas. Maybe he's still hunted, but he never becomes the face of a global manhunt. His name doesn't carry the same mythic weight. Maybe he dies quietly, forgotten in a cave, his message never amplified by fire and retribution. Afghanistan, then, remains troubled, but it never becomes the epicenter of a 2-decade global conflict. Now, Iraq, this is where the timeline truly forks. In this version of history, there's no invasion in 2003. Saddam Hussein remains in power. A tyrant, yes, but one locked in by sanctions, contained by oil-for-food programs and UN inspectors. He shouts on state television about Zionist conspiracies and American aggression, but no one listens seriously. He isn't treated as an imminent threat. There's no shock and awe. No embedded journalists, no toppling statues broadcast around the world, no global protests, no weapons of mass destruction controversy, no false flags waved at the UN. Saddam lives longer. His sons, Uday and Qusay, grow more entrenched, petty mafiosos, brutal, yes, but confined. Their horrors stay within Iraq's borders. There is no regime collapse, no power vacuum. And that single non-invasion spares the world from one of its darkest modern chapters, the rise of ISIS. Because ISIS, as we know it, emerged from the ashes of post-Saddam Iraq. The invasion dismantled the Iraqi army, left hundreds of thousands of trained fighters unemployed, angry, and armed. It was a ready-made insurgency. The U.S. presence became a recruiting tool for jihadists across the globe. Chaos gave them space, failed governance gave them legitimacy. But in this glitch timeline, there's no vacuum to fill. No collapsed state, no black flag over Mosul. Extremism still exists, of course. It never disappears. But the momentum, the spectacle, the sheer operational freedom, they're gone. Jihadist groups fester in shadows, not in the open. Recruitment videos find fewer viewers. There's no caliphate. The ripple reaches alliances too, like NATO. NATO in our world was dragged into Afghanistan. It became a bleeding ulcer. The mission stretched the alliance thin, caused division, cost lives and resources for 20 years. In this alternate reality, NATO stays focused on traditional threats, Russian military movements, Chinese naval expansion. American generals spend their time in Brussels discussing geopolitics, not roadside bombs in Helmand province. The human cost, dramatically lower. Veterans' hospitals are treating aging backs, not amputated limbs. Young men and women aren't returning from sandblasted patrols with invisible scars. VFW halls don't gain a new generation of wounded warriors. The shadow of war doesn't stretch from Fallujah to rural Ohio. Now fast forward to the Arab Spring. It still happens. The fuel remains. Authoritarianism, economic stagnation, youth frustration. Tunisia still burns first. Cairo still erupts. Protesters still take to the streets in Libya and Syria. But the context is profoundly different. In our world, the collapse of Iraq cast a long, dark shadow. Chaos, sectarian bloodshed, the rise of ISIS, it all became a cautionary tale. It fed cynicism. In this version of events, that cynicism isn't there. There's more hope, more faith that peaceful revolution might actually stick. External intervention also looks different. In Libya, Gaddafi still faces revolt, but NATO might hesitate. Without Iraq as precedent, without the war on terror framework justifying action, military intervention may not come so quickly, or at all. Civil war may still erupt, but the scale of foreign fighters and weapons flooding in is likely reduced. Syria follows a similar pattern. Assad still cracks down. Crowds still fill the streets of Homs and Aleppo. But again, without Iraq next door as a chaotic staging ground, foreign fighters have fewer paths into the conflict. Stockpiles of abandoned weapons don't lie waiting. Early rebel factions have less international support and perhaps fewer extremist infiltrators. So the fire still burns, but maybe it spreads slower, burns less hot. The refugee crisis is still real, but maybe it doesn't drown Europe in wave after wave of desperation. Headlines still warn of crackdowns, but the word caliphate never re-enters the global lexicon. Regional powers adapt too. Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Iran, they're still playing their strategic chess games. But without the power vacuum of Iraq pulling everyone into proxy wars, the game looks different. Fewer pieces fall off the board. Stakes are lower, moves are slower. Israel? It remains vigilant, surrounded by hostile rhetoric, but not by lawless, ungoverned spaces like Iraq and Syria, which in our world became terrorist playgrounds. The neighborhood feels tense, but not feral. Energy markets? Still volatile, but less erratic. Oil prices rise and fall. Sure, sanctions matter. Pipelines remain political, but there's no sudden shock from invasions. No insurgent sabotage campaigns cutting off global supply. You avoid the worst of the spikes, the market panic triggered by Baghdad in flames. The Middle East isn't suddenly peaceful. Not at all. The old poisons remain: sectarianism, dictatorship, poverty, unresolved conflict. Israel and Palestine remain locked in their ancient impasse. But without the American wars setting everything ablaze, the region doesn't ignite all at once. One less fuse gets lit, and that matters. Of course, there's a cost to all this. The region stays repressive in many places. Dictators outlast their promises of reform. People still suffer under secret police and censorship. The absence of foreign war doesn't bring freedom. It just preserves the old status quo. But the trade-off? Fewer black flags flying over ruined city squares, fewer children learning their first words in the shadow of drone strikes, fewer lives upended by war that came from faraway capitals. Repressed? Yes, but intact. Not healed, not free, but perhaps spared a second wound layered on top of the first. The scar never cut as deep. It's a sobering thought. And if you follow that thread, if you keep pulling, you begin to see just how far the consequences stretch, into places we rarely consider, into industries and technologies we take for granted. Because wars don't just kill, they accelerate, they shift priorities, and in their absence, the world evolves on a different clock. Let's take drones. In our world, they became synonymous with the war on terror, silent killers above dusty roads, precision strikes, civilian casualties. The military became obsessed with them, and that obsession drove rapid development. But here, without the battlefield demand, that development slows. Sure, early prototypes still exist. Tech companies still pitch ideas. But generals aren't desperate. There's no urgent funding pipeline. No, get this into the field by next quarter energy. R&D budgets shift elsewhere. Stealth fighters, missile defense, cyber operations. Drone warfare never becomes a defining doctrine. So who picks up the slack? Private companies, tech startups. They're the ones experimenting. Crop dusting, package delivery, aerial cinematography. Maybe Amazon's drone ambitions arrive sooner, unburdened by the shadow of military surveillance. And the public perception? It's different. Drones are tools, not weapons, not threats. They aren't loaded with emotional baggage from war zones. They're seen as convenience, not coercion. Now think about medicine. In our timeline, the war forced massive innovation in battlefield care, tourniquets, blood-clotting agents, blast trauma surgery. That progress saved lives, eventually translating into civilian ERs. But without 20 years of IED casualties, that pressure disappears. Advances still come, but slower, through grants, through academia, through trial and error. The technology still arrives, but it takes the long road, not the warpath. Even cybersecurity looks different. In our world, it exploded after 9/11. driven by counter-terror paranoia and fears of digital sabotage. But here, it stays a game of cat and mouse between hackers and corporations. Less government urgency, less surveillance infrastructure. The NSA, the CIA. They're still doing their jobs, but with smaller checkbooks, tighter oversight, fewer blank check programs, bulk phone data collection, dragnet surveillance. Those proposals likely never pass or face far more resistance. Government surveillance still grows, but more slowly. Big tech continues refining data mining, tracking clicks to sell ads, but government data grabs, they hit more legal speed bumps. Without the overwhelming fear of another imminent attack, public resistance is stronger, civil liberties harder to override. And where does that leave someone like Edward Snowden? That's a fascinating thread in this alternate history. Maybe he's just another overworked systems admin patching servers. If he does stumble upon surveillance programs, what he finds is likely smaller, less bulk collection, fewer secret courts. And if those revelations come out, they stir a murmur, not a global earthquake. A debate among policy wonks and privacy advocates. No international scandal forcing world leaders to respond. No mass encryption push overnight. Even encryption itself remains a battleground, but it's quieter. Law enforcement still argues for backdoors, but the drama plays out in courtroom filings and tech forums, not on primetime news with pundits yelling about traitors and patriots. The public stakes feel different. And that brings up a broader question. If military R&D isn't dominating the budget, where does all that brainpower go? That's the potential upside. Billions of dollars and decades of talent that went into counterterrorism in our world might instead be funneled into civilian innovation. Imagine it. Next-gen batteries for electric cars, smarter energy grids, prosthetics developed for athletes and accident victims, not just soldiers. AI trained to spot tumors on scans, not insurgents in drone feeds. Drones become peaceful first, mapping wildfires, delivering medicine to remote communities, chasing hurricanes for science. Without war as their first application, they grow up differently. Slower maybe, but more helpful. They arrive in civilian life as tools, not weapons. And zooming out, what does that feel like for the average person? Society changes deeply. Airports remain annoying, sure, but not militarized. Security is still there, but not suffocating. See something, say something isn't wallpapered across every terminal and bus stop, injecting fear into the everyday. Yes, big tech still vacuums up your data, but mostly to sell you sneakers, not to feed secret databases behind federal firewalls. Privacy fears exist, but the targets are corporations, not spy agencies. Police still look like police, not armored units in war zone gear patrolling Main Street. The visuals are different. The relationships between law enforcement and community remain closer to normal. Boarding a plane, it's just a chore, a nuisance, not a ritual soaked in suspicion. More welcome home hugs at the gate, fewer glances over shoulders. But maybe the most profound shift, it's cultural, especially for Muslim communities. Because in this timeline, September 11th doesn't happen. And that seismic crack that opened between the West and its millions of Muslim citizens never quite splits. There's no flood of panic-fueled headlines screaming about sleeper cells in suburbia. No grainy terrorist training camp footage used to represent an entire global faith. Words like jihad and sharia stay in foreign policy briefs, not political slogans or slurs. The arrests of the would-be hijackers spark debate, but not suspicion of every Muslim neighbor. There's no mass hysteria to metastasize into Islamophobia. Mosques remain community centers, places of potlucks, weddings, Friday prayers. The battles they fight are local, parking, traffic, not whether they belong in the country. There's no easy villain for a politician to point to when poll numbers drop. No Muslim bans, no lazy, uninformed rhetoric about Sharia. Young Muslims grow up under less scrutiny, more worried about school, sports, dating, not about being profiled or needing a civil rights lawyer on speed dial. The background level of anxiety is lower. Hate crimes still happen, of course. Prejudice doesn't vanish, but it never spikes into a national epidemic. Fewer parents feel the need to warn their daughters about hijabs and late nights. And far-right groups, they still exist. They still need scapegoats. But without 9/11 to galvanize their message, they likely shift focus toward immigrants in general or other vague globalist threats. Muslims are no longer the default target. And without that global war imagery, bombings, drones, cities in ruin, extremist recruiters abroad find it harder to radicalize. Their propaganda lacks fuel. Their message falters. Meanwhile, interfaith work? It has more room to breathe. A high school civics class inviting a local imam isn't controversial. It's just interesting. Muslim lives are lived more quietly, more freely. Less performative reassurance, more ordinary joy. The clash of civilizations theory, it remains an academic idea, not a worldview baked into politics and policy. And that shift changes everything about how we remember this era. There are no burning towers, no jolt of horror to snap America awake on a clear blue morning, no shared trauma, no firehouse walls filled with names, no "where were you on September 11th" to define a generation. The skyline remains unchanged. The towers still stand, just office buildings casting shadows, not memorials to grief. Is it idyllic? Maybe. But there's a counterargument, one that haunts intelligence agencies even in this alternate timeline. Complacency. Without the trauma of September 11th, there's less urgency to secure the invisible lines, less political will to fund quiet defense, less patience from voters for abstract warnings. Why spend billions on threats that haven't materialized? And that's the whisper, that the foiled plot of 2001 may have only delayed the reckoning, that another attempt is inevitable, and next time we might not be so lucky. The concern is real, that without the jolt into vigilance, the next blow could be deeper, bloodier. Maybe it's a bigger plane, maybe it's a dirtier bomb, maybe it's a sleeper cell no one's watching anymore. That's the danger. A tragedy averted can breed false confidence, and the enemy only has to succeed once. So yes, this alternate world avoids the horror of 9/11, but it carries its own risk, that we mistake silence for safety. Still, for most people in this glitch timeline, the wound never opens. The wars never begin. No Freedom Tower rises from rubble. No desert patrols stretch across 2 decades. No war memorials. No dog tags lining living room shelves. Instead, the ghosts stay asleep. The sirens never scream. The flags never fly at half-mast. It's a world shaped not by action, but by absence, by the Tuesday that remained just a Tuesday. And that leads us to the final provocative question. Is this world truly safer? Or is it simply more fragile, still clinging to outdated beliefs that the world's chaos can't reach us? Was the cost of avoiding the pain a less prepared nation, less unity, less wisdom? Because that's what this thought experiment really forces us to do, reevaluate our present, recognize how much of our normal was forged in the fire of that one day, and how different things might have been had it never come. Thank you for joining us on this episode into a world that almost was, a glitch in history, a moment averted, a future reframed. Until next time.